I make a lot of videos about how I would change the game of Pokemon, but there's one problem with all of these changes, and that's that we're simply too emotionally attached to the idea of Pokemon. If you're anything like me, Pokemon has been a major part of your life. I played it growing up. There is 30 years of continuity to deal with, which is more than my life. There are certain things in Pokemon that just make sense, even though they would be kind of weird if they weren't in Pokemon and we hadn't known them for so long. Like, for example, why does the flying type exist when there isn't a type that represents air, which is a very traditional element that we often see in everything else? Or why do we differentiate between ground and rock, but not differentiate between things like grass or trees? I reckon if you showed these to people who didn't like Pokemon or didn't understand Pokemon, they would think that these are weird design changes, but because we've grown up with them and because they're so ingrained in our life, they make quite a bit of sense to us. The answer why we don't think that they're weird is because they always have been this way. So then it got me to thinking about a problem with my fixing videos, and that is that any suggestion that I'm going to make is going to be met with the question of why change it? Because then if you're changing it, it's no longer really Pokemon. These little interactions are the parts that make Pokemon. Whether they make sense or not, they're a part of the game. But then it got me thinking about what if they weren't Pokemon? How would I design the game similar to Pokemon if I was developing it from the ground up, unrestrained from continuity, fans, or just the fact that it always has been? How would I design a creature collector? This video is brought to you by the members of the Crustacean Association, Aidan Tawney and Finnegan Cleary. Thank you for your support. If you'd like to join them and help support the channel more than you already do, it would be a great help. Thank you. This idea is not a new topic amongst Pokemon YouTubers. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that I'm a big fan of Nordist, and Nordist has done something very similar with their Stemma region. Their videos are fantastic, and they explore their own takes on the topic. But I think that's why it can be more interesting, is that everybody has different ideas on the topic. The Stemma region is focused around STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. I think that's what they represent. It's been a while since I've had to deal with that acronym. I went to university to study media. Whilst Nordist ideas are based around a creative design theme, mine are going to be based much more around a gameplay theme, and that is cohesion and teamwork. I'd like my game to be focused on Pokemon working together to achieve something. If you're a regular watcher of the channel, first of all, thank you. But you'll know that I don't like doubles in Pokemon as a competitive format. It's just never interested me. It's a bit too fast-paced for my liking, and their games can just be won or decided in a singular turn, which is something I don't really like as much. I get that these are reasons why people like it. I completely understand why people would like these types of games. But I'm somebody who prefers much more slower games, much more methodical games. I'm a big fan of games like EU4, Civilization, or Football Manager. Games that are essentially spreadsheets with a few graphics thrown in for good measure. Or if you're Football Manager, like no graphics at all. I like these games because they're all about building for the future and slowly getting into position. It means that when you do fire that kind of winning move, it really does feel good because you've kind of built towards it. Another reason why I don't like doubles is because it's really sparingly used in the games. To me, it always felt like a gimmick, as the vast majority of battles in the game that you will play are single battles. It's like if the official format of Mario Kart was that game where you have to go around popping the balloons rather than just races. Because races are the main thing that you do in the game, and then a side game is the one where you pop the balloons. I can't remember the name of it, I just remember playing it on the DS all the time. I found it really odd that Pokemon decided to take it in this direction. Does anybody have any information as to why they chose to do this? Because it just seemed really odd. I know that VGC began in Generation 4, I think, but why did they go with doubles rather than singles? In my game, cohesion would be baked into every part of the game. Every battle would be a double battle. You'd even have to pick two different starter Pokemon. Support moves that buff partners would be far more common in this game, which is something that I think Pokemon does have an issue with. Some moves which are game defining in doubles are very rarely seen in game because they are doubles exclusive, but in this I'd try and make them much more part of a regular playthrough. Pokemon's in-game can often feel like a battle to see who does the most damage the quickest. After all, it is a kid's game, and as a kid, can you resist clicking Earthquake or Surf 100 times over? But in this, I'd like to see a lot more rewards for working with a partner, and this would be done through a number of factors. As I've talked about earlier, there would be a lack of solo battles, meaning that you always have to have that other Pokemon on a field. I'd also make it so that damaging moves are a little bit weaker, so you really have to work together to achieve the goals if you're going to have to take out a Pokemon. There wouldn't be as many one-shots because you'd have to rely on a partner to help you out. This wouldn't considerably slow the game down, as you do have to remember that there are 2 Pokemon attacking. Pokemon actually does this in doubles and limits the power of spread moves so that they deal less damage when they're hitting more Pokemon. It would just make it so that the pendulum swings a little bit more to defense to encourage things like working together to break through a wall. But here's where I'm going to add the main change, and that is a dimension. This game is going to be played in 2D. Actually, Pokemon is already a game that is 3D. It moved to 3D during the X and Y generation. Well, I'm not talking about the actual graphics of the game, although everybody agrees 2D was better for Pokemon. I'm talking about the actual in-game battle mechanics. Pokemon were always traditionally placed on abstract platforms, but now they've transitioned alongside 3D to being in an actual world, and even in Legends being in the actual overworld. However, they still lacked real dimensions to how they could interact with this space. It was basically just a shootout between the two of them, and there wasn't any idea of things like positioning. It always felt a little bit different from what it was like in the anime. As a kid, when I'd play Pokemon on the playground, you'd always do like crazy stuff, like you'd be moving around, you'd be jumping on big rocks, you know. A gym would always have like things in the water just floating, and like they'd be jumping around on them. It always felt lost in how Pokemon's battle system was just Pokemon over there, Pokemon by you, shoot. I'm not saying that Pokemon's system is bad. I think it absolutely does its job exceptionally well. It's beginner friendly, simple and quick, but I also think that you could just do it differently. Rotation and triple battles did have ideas that focused around placement. You know, if you had one Pokemon on one side, they couldn't hit the Pokemon on the other side, unless they were a flying type. There you go, you don't have to make that comment, I already knew. I really liked both of these 2 battle systems, but they were very quickly abandoned to just go back to that traditional space of just Pokemon, other Pokemon, go. This is why I think if I was designing a game, I would make it in a 2D physical space, similar to games like Civilization or other turn-based strategies like Final Fantasy Tactics. In these games, a part of the game is moving around. You can move, you can position yourself so that you can attack, you can even run away from battle. Pokemon actually did try to do something like this with Pokemon Conquest, which is a great game, but as a side game, it was somewhat limited. Pokemon Conquest is a brilliant game, and if you haven't played it, go out and play it because it's really fun, it's really unique. It takes Pokemon in a completely different direction to how the game traditionally is, and it's a really fun way of doing it. I want to base my game kind of more off Pokemon Conquest than off traditional Pokemon. And there's 3 main differences from Conquest style which I want to touch on. The first is less Pokemon. Pokemon Conquest is much more a war compared to a battle. Makes sense, the game is literally called Conquest, it's about warlords. In the game, there are fewer conflicts than a traditional Pokemon game, but these conflicts generally last much longer. If you can breeze through a couple Pokemon battles in a minute, you cannot do that in Pokemon Conquest. It's much more of a longer, drawn-out conflict. Again, this is something that I actually really liked about the game. Similar to games like Civilization or EU4, they take hours to complete, and that's something I really enjoy. You feel invested in them. But I don't think for a Pokemon game you want to have that kind of length for a single match, just because then it would just become very boring if you have to do a lot of those over and over again. This is why I think if you're going to have a lot of battles in the game, then I would significantly limit the amount of Pokemon you can have. And as I've talked about earlier, It's all about cohesion, so there's going to be 2 Pokemon out on the field at once for every participant in that battle. The second change I want to make is less space. Obviously, if you're going to have less Pokemon, you're going to need less space. Pokemon Conquest maps are quite big for the amount of Pokemon that are on them, and it means that your first few turns can often be just kind of moving around or getting into position. They don't start straight away. This contributes to the longer battles of the game, as it means less confrontation. So I think that by compacting the Pokemon together, you're going to get a bit more of a battle. You still want some spaces where a Pokemon can get away, but you don't want them to have to traverse 3 turns just to get in the face of their opponents. This then also makes in-your-face characters much more viable, as they can actually get towards the opponent before being completely obliterated by ranged attacks. For me, I'm going to go with 19 different cells. But why specifically the number 19? Why not go with a square number? Well, that's because of hexagons. Everybody knows hexagons are the bestigons. They allow for a bit more unique movement, and it means that you don't have to deal with awkward diagonals, which I think is especially good for attacks that will move you forward or attacks that fire in a straight line. I think they work much better with hexagons than they would having to go off diagonals. I'd go with a big hexagon made out of smaller hexagons, and each of these sides are 3 hexagons long. So it will look something like this if I can find a picture. The reason why I've decided to go with this is because it all links back to that idea of cohesion. On a physical space where the Pokemon can move around, they can fill a lot more different roles than they traditionally can. For example, you could have one Pokemon who is up front and in your face, and another Pokemon who hangs back, maybe as a supportive Pokemon or as another damage option. In this scenario, the upfront Pokemon has a responsibility to protect the ranged Pokemon, and the ranged Pokemon has to protect the upfront Pokemon. It's very similar to how traditional RPGs are played. You could have a DPS and a support, a tank and a DPS, or even just go double DPS. It also creates fun ways that you could play, like you could have a team dedicated to rushing your opponent and just wants to be in the face all the time, or a team dedicated to holding back and letting your opponents come towards you. There's not just the decisions of what moves you are going to use, but also where you are going to place your Pokemon on the field, and it's very, very important. You wouldn't want a Pokemon who can't handle themselves in close range to get isolated or be cornered, and you wouldn't want a Pokemon who can't deal much range damage to be far back and held away from the action. However, it does provide one problem, and that's the idea of how a turn's going to work. Is it going to be a scenario where you can move or attack, or is it going to be a scenario where you move and attack? In regular Pokemon, turns happen simultaneously. Both of you choose a move at once, and then based off things like speed, you go first. Both of you make the decision at the same time. There's no individual turn between the two of you like there is in a game like chess, so to say. I don't think that this would work in this scenario, just because you're going to be moving around a lot, and having to aim attacks would mean that you're going to have a lot of misses. If you aimed an attack in a certain direction, you'd probably have to think about the fact that they're going to move, and I just think that that's something that you shouldn't have to think about. I don't think predicting whether your opponent is going to turn left or right is really something that you should have to predict. Instead, I think it should be more like chess and have separate turns for the different teams. However, this creates another problem. Who goes first? There's always going to be some sort of advantage or disadvantage of going first, so it's always going to create some problem. This is where I think the speed stat would come into play in this game, in that the faster Pokemon would always be able to attack first. So let's say you had this scenario where there are 4 different Pokemon and they all have different speeds. The way that it would work is that the fastest Pokemon moves first, and then you just go down the list. It doesn't necessarily mean that the 2 Pokemon on the same team will be moving at the same time. This does have an issue of the fact that you will know exactly how fast a certain Pokemon is. I think that this is something you would have to show from the very beginning, just so that everybody knows when their Pokemon is going to be taking their turn. It also creates another problem, which I know we just seem to continuously be creating problems, but I think that that's part of how the game should be made. You know, you keep coming across different problems and then make changes to them. This new problem is around speed ties. And really, what do you do in a speed tie in this scenario? Do you have it like how they have it in Pokemon, where it's essentially just a coin flip? I don't really know, to be honest. This wasn't something that I thought of when I was writing the script. I like the idea of when there's a speed tie, the Pokemon who loses the first speed tie will then be given some sort of buff, just a temporary buff for the next turn that means that they are going to win the next speed tie. Even if it's just a +1 in speed, it could be something quite interesting. This idea of how move order worked also informed my decision of why I think move and attack is better than move or attack. Under a move or attack scenario, I think you would actually be punishing faster Pokemon, as they'd basically be able to get towards the opponent, but then they'd be kind of a sitting duck and your opponent would be able to attack them instead. I think it would actually disincentivize speed, so I think move and attack would be much better, as it means you can get into a good position and attack on that first turn, rather than get into a good position and then your opponent exploit it. As for how movement would actually work, I think that you should keep it the same across all Pokemon, regardless of their speed. The idea for this is because I don't want faster Pokemon to be able to get out of danger and stay out of danger indefinitely, which I think they could do if they had extra movement points compared to other Pokemon. For example, you could poison a Pokemon and then just get out very quickly, and then you'd be doing a Benny Hill scenario where you're slowly chasing them, but you can't catch up with them because you're just with that 1 point slower. As a recap, my game is going to be all around cohesion between Pokemon. All battles are double battles. I actually didn't mention this earlier on, but I think wild battles, or maybe some bosses, similar to kind of the Titan Pokemon that you get in Scarlet and Violet, I think they're called Titans, these could be 2v1s, just because they're wild Pokemon, so I think it could work a bit better. But obviously on those boss Pokemon, they have some extra bonuses. It's going to be played on a hexagonal grid, which encourages position, and the faster Pokemon are going to move first, and they're going to be able to move and attack on a single turn. I'm hoping to explore this topic a little bit more in more detail and talk about some more mechanics in Pokemon, but this is just kind of a general idea of how the game should be played. If you've enjoyed the video or want to see more of stuff like this, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. We've had some massive support recently, and I just want to keep that going. Thank you very much.